You're aware of everything that happened today. For us here in Oregon, our coastline, tell me what could something like today, if there were an actual tsunami, how could that play out for us?
Yeah, so today is a reminder of where we live. And I think that's the most important thing. That even though there weren't significant impacts to Oregon coastlines, this is it. This is the place we live in, and we'd be wise to not forget that. The impact to Oregon coastlines from earthquakes like this one and much bigger than this one can be significant. First comes the strong shaking. So our bridges, structures close to the coastline would have to withstand that strong shaking, which can be challenging. And right after the strong shaking, 5, 10, or 15 minutes before comes the tsunami, which is an inundation. It looks a lot like those videos we see of storm surge during hurricanes on the East Coast, where the ocean sort of invades the land and the water level keeps rising and rising and rising. And depending on the severity of the tsunami, that could be 3 feet if we're lucky. It could be 20 or 30 feet if we're not lucky. So it could be significant impacts depending on the nature of the earthquake.
We haven't seen anything like this since when?
The last significant tsunami was in 1992, the Cape Mendocino earthquake, in very much the same region where this one happened today. I forget the exact magnitude. I want to say that was like a 7.3. It was a little bit larger. And that had a modest tsunami of a few feet in Northern California and Southern Oregon. Before that, of course, the last significant event was in the year 1700. That feels like forever ago, right? 324 years ago. That was a major, major earthquake. Magnitude 9, 1,000 times larger than this one. Widespread tsunamis that we can still see in the geologic record. You can go out in the field, and if you know where to look, you can find sand deposits associated with that tsunami. Just a much, much bigger thing compared to what happened today.
And this one today, it happened close to the San Andreas fault. Is
Yeah,
is that a problem spot for Oregonians? Like if something happens over there, are we going to see issues?
I mean, it's a problem spot in the sense that it's a very active part of the country. And so right there at that point, three faults meet. It's a really messy region. So we have the San Andreas Fault. That's where it ends. That's where it finishes in Northern California. Then we have the beginning of the Cascadia Subduction Zone, which is where we live. We live on the Cascadia Subduction Zone. And then we have a less famous offshore fault called the Mendocino Transform. This earthquake happens on the Mendocino Transform. So these faults are all meeting together right there in the Eureka, Arcata, Ferndale, California region. And so sometimes we get earthquakes on the San Andreas, sometimes we'll get an earthquake on the Mendocino, and every now and then we'll get a big earthquake on the subduction zone. So it's not a problem area per se, it's just a place where earthquakes naturally happen very frequently.
I've heard of the big one. I
Yeah,
lived on the coast for a few years, and that came up often.
yeah.
Are we due for the big one? And, you know, if so, what could we expect if something like that happened?
Yeah, we live in earthquake country. That's the inescapable truth. And so I don't want to overly alarm people, especially in the wake of this event that just happened. This event doesn't necessarily mean that the big one is more likely right now or tomorrow. But it does serve as a reminder that we live in these places that make earthquakes, and we should be thinking about them from time to time. And so what it would look like is strong shaking that was going to challenge our structures, our bridges, our dams, and tsunami inundation at the coastline. But there's things we can do. We have be aware of the tsunami evacuation zones if you're in a coastal region. Have a 72-hour earthquake kit. Get the MyShake application on your phone so you can get earthquake early warnings. I got an earthquake early warning on my phone sitting here at my desk in Eugene. That's amazing. It's amazing that we have these technologies. So even though it's scary, and it should be because these are big things, there's lots of things that we can be doing to prepare.
You had an earthquake warning app. So that means you knew a little bit ahead of time that an earthquake was coming.
I did. I was sitting right here at this desk where you see me right now, where my phone vibrated, and I looked down and I saw Android earthquake, and I saw the dot of where the earthquake was and the magnitude. And I got that alert about 10 seconds before shaking was recorded here in Eugene. I didn't feel the shaking because it was very light here, but it shows you what these earthquake early warning systems are capable of. Had this been a larger earthquake, I would have been able to take protective action before the strong shaking was felt here in my office.
Right. You mentioned a kind of a go bag type of situations, a 72-hour kit. What are some of the things you would advise someone to put in a kit like that?
I encourage folks to go to the webpage of the Oregon Office of Emergency Services. They have all sorts of resources for how to think about what to put in your go bag, how to deal with water, medication, important paperwork, a radio and batteries, and so on. They have phenomenal resources online for how to prepare, not just for earthquakes, also for wildfires and ice storms and so on. This is a good time to spend 5 minutes just going online and looking at that. Again, we got lucky. This earthquake, while it was big, it was scary. Hopefully there are minimal damages in Oregon, no impacts to our coastlines, but it's a reminder of what we need to be thinking about.
I should have started with this question, but Diego, can you tell us a bit about the work you do?
Sure. This is the work that I do. When big earthquakes happen, we look at them because every big earthquake has lessons about the place that we live in. Sometimes the fault ruptures quickly, sometimes it breaks slowly, sometimes it makes a big tsunami, sometimes it makes a small tsunami. These are all the things that we try to understand. And so over the years, the devices, the seismometers that we've been installing in the field, these devices that give us our earthquake early warning, we also use them for scientific research. So we're going to be poring over the data over the next weeks to months, trying to understand if there's anything special or peculiar about this earthquake and what does it tell us about the bigger puzzle that are earthquakes in our region.
Wow. I kind of want to lean into the tsunami warning. I know it didn't happen and
Yeah,
we're lucky, we're safe,
yeah.
but with a warning like that, how do we know, they canceled the warning. How did they know we're safe, we're clear so soon?
Yeah. I'm happy to talk about that, Gold. I've worked a lot in tsunami warnings. It's very difficult business. Because you have to be issuing warnings sometimes within 2 to 3 minutes of the earthquake, because the tsunami can be at the coastline in 5 to 10 to 15 minutes. So there's very little time to navel gaze and wonder, and you just have to make a quick decision whether you issue a warning or not with very little information. So the warning is issued by the by the National Tsunami Warning Center, which is in Palmer, Alaska. And so seismologists there in Alaska, they can see all the seismic data coming in. An alarm goes off that says earthquake. It gives them a dot on the map that says where the earthquake is. They can see it's very close to the coast. They get a rough estimate of its size. So they would have seen magnitude 7.3 right next to the coast. That's it. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. You press the alert button so people can get an alert. Then what happens is more data comes in. We have these things called tide gauges that measure water levels. We have one in Eureka, we have one in Crescent City in Northern California. So we look at the tide gauges and you can see, oh, the waves are either very small or there's no waves at all. And so based on this new information that starts to arrive, then you can think of either raising the alert level even higher or potentially canceling a warning if it turns out that there was no tsunami. But the tsunami warning centers have a really challenging task. Imagine the stress, the pressure of deciding in those 2 to 3 minutes if you're wrong. If you make a mistake, you potentially are not sending a life-saving alert out to thousands of people. So even though the alert was canceled, I think they made the right choice. The alert was issued, get people out of harm's way, evacuate the beaches. Later, we'll figure out if we maybe should have done something differently. But right after the earthquake is not the time for second guessing.
And in the town that I lived in for a while,
Yeah.
it's a fishing town.
Mhm.
A lot of people are out in boats. And you said, now I've heard 15 minutes is about the time, but you said 5, 10, 15. So if they have 5 minutes and they're already out in the water, what do they do in those cases?
Yeah, there's the exact arrival time is depends on a lot of factors that we don't always know beforehand. Depends on where you are and where the earthquake happens. So 5, 10, 15 minutes is a good number. The recommendation is if you're already out to sea, don't come to port because the waves can be big. And not only the waves, but tsunamis produce really strong currents, especially in port. So sometimes it's best to just write it out, get on the radio, listen to the harbor master, and they'll give you the guidance of when it's safe to return to port because they have standard operating procedures. They know that when they receive on the port a tsunami warning, they know how long they should wait for the all clear to allow people to return. But the important thing here, Gold, is we need to have thought of that before the earthquake, right? That's the preparation part. If we're waiting for the earthquake to sort of figure out, oh my God, how do I respond now? It's too
Mhm.
late. And so that's why it's important to be thinking right now, making plans with your family. If you're at home, what would we do? If I'm at work, if I'm out on the boat, what will I do? Think about that now. Spend 5 minutes today over dinner, over a beer after work, and just think about what you could learn from today so that next time you're not caught so unawares because there will be a next time. That's for sure.
And Diego, I have one more question for
Yeah.
you. I heard there was more than a dozen aftershocks.
Mhm.
Is that normal? And what could that mean?
Yeah, thank you for asking that. It's very normal, and it's very frightening. I get that. Aftershocks are a fact of life with these big events. Most commonly, the aftershocks are smaller than the big event. The big event we call the main shock, the main movie. So most frequently, the aftershocks for this magnitude 7 would be maybe one or two magnitude 6s, which are still kind of scary. 7 to 8 magnitude 5s, couple hundred magnitude 4s, thousands of magnitude 3s. It's really common that these aftershocks go on for days, sometimes weeks. But hopefully, the most common behavior is as time goes on, the aftershocks get less and less and less, and they should get smaller and smaller and smaller. But continue to pay attention to your local emergency management offices. They have the most up-to-date information.
And if you can just give me one more minute, I do have another question that you
Yeah,
just
sure.
caused, but we see a lot of those earthquakes offshore
Hmm.
along Oregon's coast, specifically the South Coast. But are there areas in Oregon, and I've only been here 3 years, so I'm not that sure about this one, but are there areas on land, inland, that these quakes could happen or that they're common?
Yeah, so by far the area that we worry about the most is that offshore region, and that's true in Northern California, and it's true throughout all of Oregon, Washington, and into British Columbia. That's what we call the Cascadia subduction zone. That's where we've seen the really big events, like the one from 1700 that we just discussed. But you're right, there are places where there's other smaller faults on shore. Portland is one of those. The Portland Hills Fault runs right through the city of Portland. And so these are places where we don't see earthquakes very frequently, but if we did, it would be kind of challenging because even for a smaller magnitude 6.5, for example, you're right on the fault if you live in Portland. So those would be kind of sketchy. The other place, you asked about Oregon, but the most famous place where we have faults like this is in Seattle. The Seattle fault also cuts right through the heart of Seattle, and that also has about magnitude 6 to magnitude 7 events in the historic record. And so those are faults we worry about a lot. So the offshore is the one we think about the most, but there's other places. And so yeah, again, today's a reminder. But if I could leave your viewers with anything, is that these things are scary, but there's things we can do. We're not impotent. There's things we can do to prepare.
Diego, thank you so much for your time today. I appreciate it.
Of course, Gold.
All right. You have a great rest of your week and weekend.
Yeah, you too.
Thank you.